Welcome to 10 a.m. to the point editorial discussion. In this video, we'll comprehensively and precisely analyze all the editorial articles of the Hindu newspaper of today. Have a look at the editorial page of the Hindu. We have 3 articles for the exam relevant discussion today. First, we'll discuss an article on inflation and the role of food prices in that. Then we'll discuss an article on federalism written by Shashi Tharoor. Then we'll discuss an article on a recent amendment in one of the investment related acts in India. This will be discussed in the context of prelims alone. Then we have 2 other articles. We'll have a quick overview of both of them. Then we'll move on to the detailed discussion. Now, the first article on which we'll have a quick overview is on the proposed ceasefire agreement by the US President Joe Biden. So Joe Biden proposed a ceasefire proposal, and this was taken up by the United Nations Security Council. Now the United Nations Security Council is asking both Israel and Palestine to accept this proposal. So this is not the first time UNSC is coming up with a proposal. That is why the article is titled One More Chance. So this is the second time the proposal is coming up, and the first resolution was not accepted by Israel, and that time the United States abstained from voting as well. So this time the United States is for the proposal. In fact, they have come up with a plan and UNSC has taken it up, and as a result the global community is expecting a ceasefire in Israel-Palestine region. So the proposal has a 3-stage plan. In the first stage there will be a ceasefire for 6 weeks. During that 6 weeks, there will be exchange of prisoners and hostages to both sides. In the second phase, the ceasefire will continue and there will be a withdrawal of the Israeli troops from Palestine. And the third phase, there will be a reconstruction of the Gaza Strip, or a step that will take a right step in the direction of a reconstruction of the 2-state solution. So that's the crux of the article, but the article ends with an apprehension, because Israel is very unlikely to accept this proposal, because in Israel the parliament right now, or the government that is formed right now, is a coalition government and it has many allies. So recently a centrist ally left from the coalition, and the current Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is over dependent on the far right allies. So these far right allies have already threatened the Prime Minister and the entire nation that they will quit the government if Israel accepts the 3 ceasefire agreement. So the far right allies want an end, a dead end, an end for sure for the Hamas outfit. So they are unlikely to accept this proposal. In that case, this resolution is likely to fail, but there is expectation as well, because America has proposed it and they say that Israel is in support of this. So that is what the Hindu editorial discusses in the first editorial. The second article on which we'll have a quick overview is on the Ayodhya. So you know that the Ram temple was inaugurated in Ayodhya, and it belongs to the FAIZABAD constituency of Uttar Pradesh. But in the recently concluded elections, the Bharatiya Janata Party couldn't secure a victory in this particular constituency. So this article explores that and all the dimensions for that loss. And one of the important factors the article found was that the administration, the district administration, harassed and displaced people in the name of temple development. So the development of this temple and the spectacle for the entire nation came at the cost of local people. So there were a huge resentment against these people. And now also they are facing a lot of hatred in the social media because of the loss. There is a hate campaign against the district as well as the state for voting the BJP out. So the article discusses all these things in detail. Now we'll move towards the exam relevant articles. The first article is on easing inflation. So it is relevant for us from the context of economy in GS3 paper, because inflation is a major theme there, and inflation is a major theme for the prelims as well, because the concepts becomes important there. The article discusses a current trend. So the current trends are not that relevant in a long-term perspective, but it discusses a current trend from which we can have certain takeaways. The current trend is that provisional headline retail inflation of May has eased to a 12-month low of 4.75%. So from this statement, we'll take a lot of takeaways. First of all, it is the provisional. Provisional means it is an estimate for the month of May, and it is a headline retail inflation. So if we take headline inflation, you have to understand it in contrast with core inflation. When we talk about headline inflation, we are talking about the total inflation in an economy, which includes the change in prices of everything, including food and fuel. But when we talk about core inflation, we accept food and fuel from that. The reason why we accept food and fuel is because it is highly volatile in nature. So that is the difference between headline and core inflation. And here we have considered headline inflation. When we talk about inflation, we usually consider headline inflation because it is the total inflation in an economy. Now, it also talks about retail inflation. That has to be understood in the context of retail and wholesale inflation. Retail inflation talks about the rate at which consumers buy the products, and wholesale inflation is the price at which wholesalers sell these products. So what actually manifests in an economy is the retail inflation. And there are 4 types of consumer price index through which we calculate retail inflation. The first is CPI of the industrial workers. The second is CPI of the agricultural laborer. Third is CPI of the rural laborer. And fourth is CPI of rural urban combined. And very often we take this combined statistics to analyze inflation. One important difference here is that CPI is released by National Statistical Office, whereas WPI is released by the Office of Economic Advisor, Ministry of Commerce and Industry. So from this particular statement, we'll get an idea about headline inflation and core inflation, wholesale inflation and consumer price inflation, and about the trends. Right now the rate is at 4.75%. You should know that there is a statutory limit that is set by the FRBM Act, which is 4% plus or minus 2. So the RBI through the monetary policy aims to control the price at 4% plus or minus 2. And right now it is 4.75%, which is a very good number. That is why the article is titled Easing Inflation. But we have some concerns. Despite the easing of inflation, food prices remains high, and that is a matter of concern. And these food prices are driven mainly by vegetables and pulses. Within vegetables, the major constituents are TOP, tomato, onion and potato. So TOP has a major share within the vegetable basket, and change in prices of TOP can impact the vegetable prices and inflation as a whole. That is why we take it as a group and discuss them. Now, one of the important developments in the current trend is that the current monsoon that is going on is predicted to be above normal based on the long period average. But despite that above normal forecast, we have a 12% deficient rainfall from June 1 to June 12th. So in the initial periods of the monsoon, we have a deficient rainfall. So this is likely to affect the food price, and it can affect the monsoon forecast in the coming future as well. So that means this price rise in food prices is a major concern despite the easing of inflation. So it will give you certain understanding about the current trends, and it will give you certain conceptual clarity on the terms related to inflation. So that's the takeaway from this particular Hindu editorial. Now let's move to the second editorial. This is written by Lok Sabha member Shashi Tharoor from the Trivandrum constituency of Kerala. This article is on federalism. Article criticizes the government, but in that criticism you will have a lot of points as to the issues of federalism in India. So I've listed them down, and it is a very important topic for the GS2 paper. It is 2 here, GS2 paper of the mains under the polity section. So let's look at the challenges to federalism one by one. First of all, the author says that there is a lack of consensus in decision making. In fact, it is a lack of there was a lack of consensus in the last 10 years. That is what the author tries to argue, because all the examples are taken from the last 10 years, and the author gives a way forward for the next 5 years as well. So this is substantiated with an example. So there was a nationwide lockdown in the context of COVID in India, and this nationwide lockdown was imposed using a loophole in the National Disaster Management Act. And this act was used without consulting the chief ministers of the state. So everyone was taken for a surprise when the nationwide lockdown was imposed. And you will know the pictures of people who are walking miles and miles barefoot through roads, because the decision was imposed all of a sudden without consulting the chief ministers. So this is an example of lack of consensus in decision making with respect to federalism. Second, seeking to force Hindi upon southern states. So language is a very sensitive issue in India. In fact, the states in India are formed on the basis of language, and it still keeps on going. So trying to impose a language on other states will create federal tensions, says the author. The third point, use of investigative agencies against political opponents in state parties. So there are examples of Jharkhand Chief Minister being in jail. He is a member of Jharkhand Mukti Morcha. The examples of Enforcement Directorate raids in Tamil Nadu and Kerala. So such acts of coercive federalism will affect the regional parties and the states and the center-state relations, says the author. Next is the creation of PMKS fund, which is outside the ambit of CAG audit at the cost of CMDRF. So the actual expenses in a state happens at the state level. So the consolidation of these funds to the central government is further consolidates the resources in the hands of the central government at the cost of states. Next reason is the dismantling of statehood without consensus building. This is argued in the context of the abrogation of Article 370 in Kashmir. The point is, if a state can be made into an union territory, all of a sudden, the same threat stands for all other states in India. So there will be a sense of insecurity among the states of India. The constitution provides that India is an indestructible union of destructible states. So that means states can be reorganized. But it is not a practical move to reorganize the state at the will of center without the consensus of the state. That can create internal security threats. So the move in Kashmir is likely to create such threat and insecurity in the state level. The next is the increase in share of cess in tax pool. This is a concern because cess constitutes the undivisible pool of the taxes. It need not be divided to the states. So in the recent years, we can see a rise in the amount of cess in the total tax pool, and subsequently there is increased demand for tax devolution from the states as well. So that is yet another factor that affects center-state relations. The major reason that is in contention is the 2026 delimitation, because the 91st constitutional amendment is going to expire in 2026. This amendment places the current delimitation as per the 1971 census. Once this expires, a fresh delimitation will be conducted as announced by the government on the basis of the recent census, which is the 2021 census. If the 2021 census is taken into account for delimitation, the states that did well in women empowerment, in literacy rate, in curtailing the fertility rate will be penalized. So states that didn't perform well, or states that have an increasing level of population, will be benefited with this delimitation. So the point at the end of it is increasing tensions between states. The next reason is the changing terms of reference of the 15th Finance Commission as per the 2011 population. So same issue pertains here. The 15th Finance Commission considered the 2011 census as a demographic indicator for tax devolution. When 2011 census is considered, the same issue will happen. States that performed well demographically will be penalized. One example the author suggests here is that the devolution to UP after this particular finance commission was 25,069 crores, which is the devolution to the 5 southern states combined. So these things can create political tensions. Even though these are technical in nature, these can create political tensions, political federal tensions. The author suggests that there is an urgent need to revive Article 263, that is the Interstate Council. Even though it is a constitutionally mandated body, it first came into functioning after the recommendation of the Sarkaria Commission. So there is a need to revive this body, especially in the absence of planning commission, because Niti Aayog works more like a bureaucratic machinery. So there needs to be a platform where center and state political executive should come together and discuss the concerns of the state and come at a consensus for resource devolution and governance. The author quotes an article by Prime Minister Modi when he was the Gujarat Chief Minister. This can be used as a concluding statement for any answers if you want. It says that each state ought to forge its own development path, engaging with other states in a spirit of competitive federalism, which meant attracting investment and improving governance and stoutly resisting the encroachment of central government on state rights. So this is a statement in the spirit of cooperative and competitive federalism. It can be used at your wish. That's the takeaway from it. The issues of federalism are listed one by one. It can either be used as points or as value additions or as examples in your answers. That's the takeaway from this Hindu editorial. Moving to the next article, it deals with a specific amendment in the Foreign Exchange Management Non-Debt Instrument Rules of 2019. In short, it is called as the FEMA NDI amendment. We'll discuss this for conceptual clarity for the prelims purpose alone. The amendment says that any investment in Indian companies, whether it is direct or indirect, which originates from either entities or beneficial owners or citizens of countries that share a land border with India. So in simple words, any investment coming from countries that share a land border with India, that means the neighboring countries. So it can be from entities, beneficial owners and citizens, need prior government approval. That's the amendment. Prior government approval is called as PN3 requirement. So neighboring countries, investment from neighboring countries, be it from entities, beneficial owners or citizens, need prior government approval. This amendment was made in the context of COVID, because COVID, as we know, is a black swan event. That means an unprecedented and big economic event that will have a lot of impact on the economy. So COVID is a black swan event. In the context of black swan event, we wanted to curtail competitive takeovers or acquisitions, especially when big companies from China or Pakistan, if they come and if they invest or buy the major stake in an Indian company, they can acquire the ownership. So to curb that, we came up with this amendment. But this amendment still continues, and it has a lot of issues that affects the foreign investments to India at present. And that is what the article intends to discuss. The first issue with this amendment is that the clause of beneficial owner is not clearly defined. So a person can hail from this country and they can be working or be based in some other country, maybe in Europe and US, but still their investment will be affected if they are considered as a beneficial owner in the vaguest of the sense. So that is where the issue of not defining this concept comes. Second, this PN3 requirement has high rejection rate and delay. So this can be seen in the larger context of red tapeism or bureaucratic apathy in India. So any kind of approval like that will naturally face high rejection rate and delay. That will affect the investments. So as you know, market is very volatile and very sensitive. So such issues can have a detrimental impact. The third is with regarding to startups, because startups rely a lot on investments, especially venture capital and angel investments, and it can come from the neighboring countries as well. So in this context, in the context of such regulatory clauses, startups face a threat of insolvency. startups that have already started eyeing investments from these countries can face a threat of insolvency. The last reason is that the regulatory agencies have the power to impose amounts of fine that accounts for 3 times the size of investment. So imagine the threat that is there for an investor or a company that is planning to take an investment from a neighboring country. So this is a huge disincentivizing move for foreign investment in Indian economy. So the article tries to discuss that. In our perspective, we just have to understand the concept and the overall understanding of the situation. That's the takeaway for us from this article. So that is what to the point editorial discussion has to offer from the Hindu today. Thank you for listening.